Ladies and gentlemen, you cannot make this up. If you thought Nvidia were being really lazy with the brand new 50 series, then check this out. It's the brand new RTX 5070 Ti, and this was as it was delivered to me. They couldn't even be bothered to put it in an outer box. Maybe they thought no one would notice this was a 5070 Ti, except it says 50 there, and the person that delivered it went,
"Oh, those cards are really hard to get hold of, aren't they?"
Yes, I know! The previous 4070 Ti Super, I think, was the best all-round card of Nvidia's lineup before. This one is now a little bit cheaper, $50 less. I haven't tested this yet. As I say, we're going to be doing this together and finding out exactly how this thing performs and whether it is going to be worth your cash. But with only around about 6% more CUDA cores, we're not going to see like crazy performance differences. We will see as we go throughout this video whether this thing is actually any good. We've got loads of different components on our desk to give us the best all-round price to performance gaming machine that's hopefully going to absolutely crush it. When it even comes to 4K gaming, we do have new features like multi-frame generation. Is it going to be useful, or is it going to be a little bit of a throwaway feature? Let's discover exactly how good the brand new 5070 Ti is and build this awesome gaming PC right after a short word from this video sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, the 4000D has returned anew with Corsair's Frame 4000D. This brand new case sees improvements left, right and centre, with a fully modular design for complete customization and an increase to the length to support larger graphics cards, with up to 405mm of clearance when using front fans. It supports two 360 radiators at the same time, BTF, Project Zero and Stealth motherboards, and it even has a GPU anti-sag arm to look after your sparkly new 50 series graphics card. Learn more about this monumental case today with the link down below. Let's kick things off then by actually taking a closer look at what we have. And yes, they have forever ruined the visuals of this box, but obviously what is inside this is far more important. So there are going to be quite a few different SKUs. It's important to know there is no Founders Edition of the 5070 Ti, but there is one of the 5070, which I find a little bit odd, but hey, Nvidia do odd things. This is MSI's Ventus. Also confusingly, this is an OC edition, but this is supposed to be a MSRP SKU for whatever that's going to mean. But you can see that this is a considerably smaller card than pretty much all of the other ones we've tested. Now, the TDP on this has increased ever so slightly, but not by much. The minimum PSU requirements for this is 750. On the older cards, it was 700, but obviously it depends on the CPU that you're using. That's not like set in stone. Ventus is always a little bit of a slightly unusual SKU because they always have this like silver shroud on it, but then the top of this is black. So we're going to go for like a silvery black build here today, but if you were just going to like get this because it was just the one that was available and you didn't like the silver, well, you're not actually going to see that much in a normal build anyway, whereas if you go for a vertical GPU mount, then obviously it's pretty much all you're going to see. Taking a closer look at the back of the card, you can see it's pretty standard here. You've got an MSI logo. Doesn't really look like there's going to be any RGB on this card at all. Maybe there'll be a light or two, but obviously you do have this large cutout here for airflow. You do have a 12/16 pin on the top. Obviously it needs that adapter if you don't have a power supply that properly supports it. And then one of the nice features that you do get with this, and I suppose does make it worth going for over 40 series, would be the port selection, because now you have DisplayPort 2.1, which is going to make it more future-proof. But of course, before we can actually test that, we do need to get a rig assembled. And what we're going to go for here, as I say, is all about price to performance. I don't want to skimp on features. I want to make sure that we've got a fully complete system, but I want you to be able to do this as cheaply as possible, especially if these cards are going to be a little bit more expensive at launch. Again, if they're massively more expensive, don't buy them. They are not going to be worth it, but we're trying to save as much money as possible in any way that we can. So we're doing that actually with this Prime motherboard. It's X870-P, but as you can see, it does have this silver color palette, which is what I've done for this, but then it does have a whole host of other features as well. To be fair, on more of a budget, you can get this for just over £200 in the UK. So obviously this is AM5. We're using the brand new Ryzen 9000 chips with this, but 7000 is absolutely fine if you want to save yourself some money. Decent cooling actually for the VRMs. You've got M.2 heat sinks. This top one will support PCI Gen 5, but you probably want to go for a third-party heatsink really because it's not going to be massive. Fine for Gen 4, maybe not for Gen 5. But then this does also come with Wi-Fi 7 support. And then you do also have PCI Generation 5 X16 on this top slot as well. This new card is PCI Generation 5, but even on the 5090, there was basically no real difference between Gen 4 and Gen 5. So nice to have, definitely not essential. Let's grab our lovely silvery motherboard, place it down on top of the box, and then we can grab our 8-core CPU. Now, immediately there's going to be people going,
"Oh, why is he not using 9800X3D? What a loser, he doesn't know what he's talking about."
Obviously, if you went for that chip, in certain titles, you would get better performance. But this is not a 5080, it's not a 5090. You're going to essentially run into CPU bottlenecks less often. So bear in mind, especially in the US, there's potentially like a $200 difference between this and the X3D version. Obviously, if you want to buy both, fantastic, but if you are trying to like maximize bang for buck, this is going to make a whole bunch more sense. Or even grab like the previous generation 7700X if you want. It'll have less performance, but again, it'll save yourself a little bit of cash. It's all about trade-offs. How can you build a PC that looks great, doesn't have compromises, and doesn't cost you as much money as it otherwise could? Because obviously you can always throw money at the problem, but a few months in, you might start to realize it probably wasn't worth it. Then you can press on and actually grab yourself some screwdrivers. Not that we need it actually for the RAM, but we will for the SSD. In terms of the RAM, we've gone for G-Skill Trident Z5, ideal world, 6000 megahertz CL30, or as close to those figures as you can get. I wouldn't pay through the nose for it, but these days the price of memory has come down so much that actually the most popular kits, which are those kits, are usually among some of the cheaper anyway. Just to upset Editor Carl, I'll now ruin the clean floor and then press on to our SSD. And this is actually a really good value option. It's PCI Gen 4, 7200 on the writes. No, 7200 on the reads, 6200 on the writes. You can usually find this for just over £60 here in the UK as well. I assume it's the same in the US, but Acer are kind of come out of nowhere really from not really doing SSDs to suddenly offering something that is really quite enticing. Just open up this top slot, make sure you do remove the little plastic film if you haven't already, but I've used this board before. Then you can grab your SSD, line this up and just drop it down, then whack that back on top. And then I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's now time to install our CPU cooler. And this is, again, one of my absolute favorites. I know I sound like a bit of a nerd here when I talk about this, but this thing is usually available for roughly £30 or dollars, and it like punches far above its weight. I mean, obviously you're not going to be able to put like a 16-core CPU on this and expect it to run really coolly and quietly, but on something like a 9700X, it should be absolutely fine. You literally just remove the default AM5 mount, whack these little posts on, attach the AMD brackets, grab the thermal paste that comes in the box and just add a little pea-sized amount in the middle, whack these fans off completely toollessly, and then this literally just slides on over the top with a screwdriver to get it secure. Then you can place those fans back. They literally just press in. Then you can plug the fans into this little CPU header and then follow that up with the addressable RGB. And that then, ladies and gentlemen, of course means that our motherboard is complete and we are ready to put this inside our chassis. We've used this loads on the channel. I think this is probably the most used case I've had that hasn't been a personal one because I love this thing. It's all about value. This is not a cheap case. This is usually for just under £100 or dollars in the UK. But you do get these absolutely massive 160mm fans on the front. They come as standard, they're RGB, they're great. You do also get a black one at the back as well. So obviously if you wanted to swap this out for something more attractive, you can. It's called the Lancool 216 or sometimes the 216X. And it just comes with everything that you need. Loads of space for loads of hubs and things. And you do actually have RGB and fan hub at the top as well. So it's got everything that you need for a very accessible price. So let's drop this down, grab our motherboard, line that up, secure it with the screws. Oh, and then you'll notice it starts to get a little bit heavier. Just wait till you put the power supply and the graphics card in. We can start to think about cable management and things. Remember that because we have this hub at the top, there's not really that much we need to do, to be honest. I've kind of pre-cable managed this from when I built in this before. But essentially you have your HD audio that is actually going to control this little port on the top here. All of these need to receive a signal from the motherboard or they won't do anything. They're just empty ports in your case. Our USB-C is this little connection here that annoyingly is not reversible. I've had a PC that wouldn't boot before because I've plugged this in the wrong way round. So do ensure that it goes in all the way nice and easily. If you're having issues, maybe try that, see if that's the problem. Next to that here though, we do have our USB 3. This thing dangling down here is what we call a SATA power. This is going to go to our power supply. We do have this little fan cable that's going to control the fan hub so that those fans actually spin up and our motherboard can tell them how fast or how quiet they need to be at any given time. And then you do have your addressable RGB as well. So both of these obviously will control the hub and then be relayed to everything else that you connect to it. Oh, and last but not least, you also have this one that's called front panel. This actually gets the power button to do anything when you press it. Pretty essential. Starting at the top, here is our USB-C. Below that we have our USB 3. Move all the way down to the bottom and this one is actually quite helpfully labeled as front panel. Then we have another addressable RGB. our fan header for our hub, and then last but not least, our front panel audio. And actually, whilst we're here, we may as well install our graphics card. I usually do this standing up just because it's easier to show you guys, but it is very straightforward, and I'd recommend you do it with your PC lying down like this. Essentially, you just need to remove these two slot covers here. I've already done that again because I've used this case loads of times before. You find you have your PCI finger, obviously line this up with its top slot. There's only one right way of doing this, but you just give it a little push till it clicks into position, and then screw that down into place. And then, ladies and gentlemen, as I say, starting to get a little bit heavier now, this is what your PC is going to look like. And it's my favorite kind of PC. Everything goes together. The graphics card perfectly matches the board. You're welcome. And we haven't really needed to do anything, have we? We just built it up. There were no swapping things out. Obviously, you can add extra fans at the top. You can put them down the bottom and things. But this is going to be absolutely fine. You've got loads of mesh on the front, massive fans. It's going to get all of the airflow that you need. It will passively go out the top. And the door's gone. I've just asked the delivery guy what power supply he'd recommend for the brand new RTX 5070 Ti, and he said, why don't you go for the Montech Century G5 850 watts? And I said, that's exactly what I'm going to recommend. In all seriousness though, obviously he didn't mention that, he was just delivering a parcel, but this is an 850 watt unit that's available for under £100, and actually it's not too bad. It's gold rated, comes with a 5-year warranty. Montech is not one of these like super cheap brands no one's ever heard of, and you know, it's not going to do anything particularly special other than power your PC. But again, if you're trying to save money, like what more do you really need? It's still rated gold for efficiency, so it's not like it's a bronze supply or anything like that. It does also have your 12 volt high power connection. I think this one is limited to 450 watts, but for most cards that's going to be fine. Let's get our cables plugged in before we actually get this screwed in. Once that's underway, just slot this into position. I have had to unplug this HD audio temporarily, but obviously plug it back in. You can then start feeding the cables through to their respective places. I also like the fact that you've got these very large cutouts on the bottom of this to actually get everything connected. You can't miss this absolutely huge fat ATX look at the top right, but some people do miss the CPU connection that needs to go at the top left. Oh, and then last, but certainly not least, give this a spin and just make sure everything else is connected. So things like fans, RGB hubs, all of this stuff, including this SATA power down the bottom. Give the cables a little bit of a tidy where you can. And there we are. How easy was that? That's got to be, he says breaking it, one of the easiest PCs I've built in a long time. And most of this really just comes down to the fact that we've used an air cooler. Saves you so much time. This is quite a good segue to say that this case has this bottom piece that you can remove, which is easy if you want to quickly like change cables and things. Oh, I saw it before the comments. Yes, I hadn't plugged the HD audio back in, I have now. Oh, PC Centric, you've done it wrong. Shut up. Moment of truth. Oh. I'd plugged the front panel connection in wrong. Remember when I said it was essential? I don't know how I managed that, mind you, but hey, I did. Well, that looks and sounds better, doesn't it? Oh, the stress. The stress. Oh no. Definitely not the most out there system. I wouldn't say it's like crazy good looking or anything like that. It's just a solid bit of kit, really. It can be improved over time. It's a really nice, solid, sturdy chassis. If you want to upgrade this with bigger graphics cards, more fans, ARGB coolers and things, it's going to be really easy to do so. But it's just a very flexible system. It's a great base to start our rig, and we have maximized priced performance. But the real question is this actually going to boot and show us a display? I cannot see any LEDs on this whatsoever. How nuts is that ASUS would make a motherboard without a single diagnostic debug LED on it? I mean, please correct me. I'll put a pinned comment if I can find it. But what is going on? Oh, it did work. That took a while. It was just doing the RAM training. But if we had some LEDs on the blimmin' motherboard to tell us that, fine. ASUS, bad. £200 motherboard, bad. Matches our theme, but otherwise, So here we are then, everyone. Moment of truth time. Everything is all set up and ready to go. We do have a fan profile set on this so that the fans aren't like ramping up when they don't need to. I've enabled XMP, but otherwise everything is pretty standard, pretty much out of the box settings. So what you're seeing here is some Dragon Age Veilguard. Oh, Dragon Age Veilguard, why are you playing that? I've actually finished it. I put 75 hours into it. It's very meh. The gameplay itself, I would say, is very good, which is what kept me going. But yeah, the story is Interesting, let's just say that. And what you're seeing here is currently running at the Ultra preset. We have this set to 4K DLSS performance. And what I'd say I kind of want from this system, what I want from this GPU, is essentially to be compromise-free as long as you're happy to use DLSS balanced or performance. Because personally, I think that trade-off is definitely worth it. It will save yourself a whole bunch of money compared to going for like a 5080 or 5090, so you can get hold of them. And ultimately, especially on a screen size like this, can you really notice that much of a difference? Personally, no. In some games where there's a lot of foliage like Black Myth or Horizon, yes, but for most of your bread and butter gaming, I would say no. So this is running very well actually, around about 100 FPS or so. I don't think you could really ask for that much more. But while it is running at the Ultra preset, we don't have any ray tracing enabled. So let's see what happens if we find this and turn it on. And this does definitely affect your frame rate, and it has affected our latency as well. We've gone up a fair bit to around about 28 milliseconds of latency. Frame rate has dropped down to around about 80 FPS or so. But again, especially if you're playing this on like a television with a controller, I don't actually think you're necessarily going to notice that much difference in a single player game like this. Obviously, if it was multi, that would be like a completely different story. It's going to depend how much you care essentially about RT, because as long as you're getting over 60 FPS, a lot of people are going to be happy with that, but I think it is just always going to be the case that if you turn ray tracing on, your frame rate is going to go down. Then we will turn frame gen on. Now this is going to work just the old-fashioned way, essentially 2 times frame gen, which essentially renders a frame properly, AI, render, AI, render, and so forth. And as you can see, when you turn this on, your frame rate will increase, but it's not actually gone through the roof. We've gone to about 120 FPS from what we were getting, about 80 or so. So it's definitely not double, but it is a decent improvement. And in terms of latency, this has definitely gone up to around about 40 milliseconds or so. Pretty much anything under 55 milliseconds is my cheat sheet in a single player game when it still feels great. Any more than that and it starts to feel a little bit like you're steering your character. But because Dragon Age isn't a game that natively supports DLSS 4 at the moment, if you want to turn on the multi-frame generation, which is what's going to give you those sky-high frame rates when it comes to smoothness, again, not responsiveness, you actually need to come into the NVIDIA app and use the override. So if you go to DLSS Models preset, then what you can actually do is just in one click, you can make it use the latest version of DLSS and latest version of DLSS frame generation all in one swoop. And then we're going to find where it says DLSS frame generation, and we're going to change this, I think, to 3x. The latency's actually gone down ever so slightly. I wouldn't say you can actually notice that much of a difference, but it's weird because now that we have 180 FPS of smoothness, and because we've got the latest model, the latency is essentially the same. It's like a weird illusion where it does feel a little bit more responsive. If you were playing something that was really heavily dependent on latency, then I don't think you would get this. You'd find the smoothness, but I think you'd be able to notice when you're kind of aiming that it wasn't quite as tight. So it's going to depend on the game. If you're going to play games with path tracing, as we'll show in just a second, I think this might be a different story. But actually, my worries about multi-frame gen in a game like this, even with ray tracing, seem to have slightly subsided. And this is at 4K as well. If you're playing at high refresh 1440p, you'd obviously get even better results. 170 FPS, 40 milliseconds of latency, that's not bad. And in terms of artifacting and things, there is a little bit around the character's head, but honestly, like, you've got to be really nitpicky to see it. I mean, Dragon Age is actually one of the better games, I think, for testing DLSS and frame gen. But again, something like Black Myth, where you've got loads of hair, that is a different story. But from one game that has arguably disappointed many to another that disappointed quite a few, but has got a fair bit better over time. And we've got our quintessential ray trace settings at the moment. So this is running with ray tracing set to ultra. There is path tracing, we've not got that enabled. We do have everything else set to ultra as well, but this is running at DLSS super resolution set to performance. And as you can see, it's an absolutely stunning game, even without the path tracing. In terms of the frame rate, I mean, we're getting 60, 65 FPS, so you don't have to use frame generation in this if you don't want to. Latency is around about 35 to 40 milliseconds or so, and as this is a slower paced game, you're not really going to have any issues playing like this. But of course, the other thing we can do is to enable our DLSS frame generation. So we go into the options menu, and this is actually one that does have native DLSS 4 support. We will have to restart the game, so we'll choose DLSS frame gen, hit apply. And then when we return, you can now see that our frame rate has actually gone up quite a lot. Remember, this is AI generated frames, so we're getting extra smoothness, we're not getting extra responsiveness. But I definitely think the more that I test this tech, that your brain does kind of like fill in some of the blanks a little bit. It depends what you're doing, because as soon as you are like actually trying to like aim, like, I don't know, with your gun and stuff like that, this is when you're going to notice that either it doesn't feel as good or it feels, well, very similar essentially, which is why I say in a multiplayer game, please don't turn frame generation on. You want want the lowest possible latency. And I mean, look at the visuals that you've got at the moment with all of this ray tracing, the frame generation. There definitely is a little bit of artifacting when you look for it from time to time, but is it enough for me to actually turn the tech off? No. We can go to multi-frame generation 3x, which is now 2 AI generated frames and 1 rendered one, and that has increased the frame rate a little bit more to around about 150 FPS. Now we are going to be even more prone to kind of like AI weirdness and things, but is it an issue? Is it something I can really notice? Not massively. There's potentially a little bit of like weirdness and waviness to these lines, but then some of that is going to be down to the DLSS super resolution as well. It's just all of these things kind of compounding together. You know, there's no doubt about it. It's not going to give you the perfect image, like full native, no DLSS, no frame generation. Obviously it's going to look better, but when your frame rate will quite literally go through the toilet, you can't have it all, right? This is the technology that kind of allows you to play at 4K at these sorts of frame rates. You don't have to like it, you don't have to use it, but I do think it's nice that we have the option. But again, remember, you are going to have a big high refresh rate monitor for multi-frame generation specifically to actually be useful, because if you've got 120 FPS display, you're serving it AI generated frames, that is completely pointless because you're then seeing AI frames when you would normally see rendered frames. So yeah, actually, so far so good. No issues with any of the games that we've played, but we haven't tried path tracing yet, and I want to get probably the most demanding game that topples even the best of the best to really see where this is going to slot in. So what you're seeing now is some Alan Wake 2, and this is very hard to run for a whole variety of reasons. This is running ultra settings but without any ray tracing whatsoever. DLSS is set to performance, frame generation is off. So this is probably the way I would choose to play this game, to be honest with you, not because the path tracing and the ray tracing isn't good, but just because I would want to have probably around about 80 FPS personally, and obviously as soon as you turn the other settings on, it's going to affect that. But of course we do have DLSS frame generation and ray tracing, so usually they work very well together and enables you to get the visuals without necessarily losing the frame rate. But let's see what happens, shall we? We go into graphics and we'll find our ray tracing, and we'll set this to medium at first, and then we'll come out, and yeah, you already start to see the problem. And I'm sure Nvidia are watching this going, oh, it's meant for 1440p. No. You can see that, yes, without any frame generation, we have now toppled this as we are getting a lowly 44 FPS. And you could play like this, but I mean, why would you, as I say? So is our saving grace gonna be DLSS frame generation? Let's have a look. I mean, actually, our latency at the moment is about... No, our latency is already about 60 milliseconds or so because the GPUs just have to do so much work. That is a bit disappointing actually, because we supposedly have all of these better ray tracing cores and tensor cores. So I would have hoped that that would be a whole lot lower. Again, this uses DLSS 4, so we do have all of our selectors actually in the game, and immediately you can now see that our frame rate has increased. We're getting around about 80 frames a second or so, but yeah, our latency is now, what's that, 80 milliseconds or so. And to be fair, it's absolutely fine all of the time you're kind of just like roaming around like this. I mean, this is a very slow-paced game, so if there was a title that you probably could put up with high latency, maybe, you know, like 70, even getting on for 80, it probably would be this one. But, you know, if you're paying all of this money for top-end hardware, and you open up Alan Wake and you expect to be able to turn all of the bells and whistles on your brand new £700 graphics card, almost certainly more than £700 graphics card, then I still think you're going to be a little bit disappointing. We do have DLSS Legacy mode, I suppose. We turn that on, it will give us an even higher frame rate, hopefully, and should affect the latency. Yeah, look, that has gone down, but not crazily. So that's changed from the newer transformer model of super resolution down to the CNN, which is the old one. Of course, though, we couldn't put a 5070 Ti in our system and not try out the multi-frame generation in Alan Wake 2. So as soon as we turn on our 4X, our 3 AI-generated frames start taking over, and we're now getting around about 160 FPS. So I'm sure this looks absolutely fantastic in terms of video, but once again, our PC latency's gone not the absolute highest we've seen it, but a lot higher than I'd want it, around about 75 that's peaking at. And you can definitely start to see some artifacting when you do move the mouse quite quickly around foliage and things. I don't think this is like a one-trick pony that's going to like completely fix the game, but when you are looking at obviously very low frame rates and you do have a way to boost them very high, and it is a slower paced game, it's certainly worth experimenting with. I think I have mixed thoughts on Alan Wake 2. Oh, it's crashed my PC. Boo. And guys, that was actually a hard lock. For some reason, it took 3 restarts to actually get it to fix. Let's currently take people out, because obviously this is Fortnite. This is my game. I'm actually quite good at this, which is surprising for me. There is a weird bug in this system though, where it keeps actually stopping the recording for some reason with shadow play. No idea why. I'll report that to NVIDIA. That might just be like a driver thing, but it was a little bit odd. Well, that's 2 frags for me now. Do people still say frags? What we've got this company running at are the settings that I personally use. So this is high pretty much across the board, apart from ultra textures and ultra view distance as well. So clearly a solid way to do it. And to be honest, if you were to upgrade to a 5090 or 5080, you wouldn't really get any noticeable difference. Not unless you were running like a 4K 480 hertz monitor or something like that. But to say this is the sweet spot is an understatement. But we've seen how it performs across the board. It's only really the path tracing that I'd say it's struggled at. Everything else, actually at the moment, I'd say is relatively impressive. But of course, the big question is, how's it going to perform against all of the other cards? So let's hand you over to the guy that's been doing the numbers, the one, the only, Bench Carl.
Hello everyone, it's me, Bench Carl, and I'm back with more benchmarks, more GPUs, and some actual positive news. The 5070 Ti doesn't suck. In fact, we quite like it. Well, performance-wise at least. We'll get onto the pricing, value, and real-world factors a little bit later on. But let's start with the surprisingly positive. The 5070 Ti offers some impressive gains over the previous generation, comfortably outperforming the 2-year-old 4070 Ti and 1-year-old 4070 Ti Super. At 4K, the 5070 Ti offers an average increase of around 15% over the 4070 Ti Super and around 27% increase over the 4070 Ti, putting it within earshot of the RTX 4080 and 4080 Super. 15% isn't a huge gain, but this supposedly costs $50 less than the 4070 Ti Super, which, on paper, is quite impressive. As a result, this makes the RTX 5070 Ti just 13% slower than the RTX 5080 on average. Again, really hitting home just how disappointing the RTX 5080 is without a manual overclock. That card really should have been much closer to the 4090 in performance, or at least offer more VRAM or something to justify its price. As we step things down to 1440p and reduce the load on that GPU, the 5070 Ti works out to be around 10% faster than the 4070 Ti Super and around 18% faster than the 4070 Ti. Again, we're more or less equal with the RTX 4080 and just a bit slower than the 4080 Super at 1440p. Taking a look at the ray tracing results, and this is something I just don't understand with the Blackwell architecture. In the 4 ray tracing tests we ran, we're generally a little bit slower than the 4080 and 4080 Super, whereas without RT, the 5070 Ti was neck and neck with these GPUs. To be clear, it's like 4 or 5 FPS here or there, but I thought Blackwell was supposed to be better at ray tracing with more RT and tensor cores. Obviously, we're way ahead of the old 4070 Ti and Ti Super, but it just seems weird that RT performance didn't see a larger improvement versus 40 series. Of course, the 5070 Ti is capable of multi-frame gen, so if you want to run Cyberpunk at 4K ray tracing ultra preset with DLSS quality at over 150 FPS of visual smoothness, then you can. The downside's obviously going to be latency and random artifacts here and there. Though at 4K with a latency of 49 to 54 milliseconds, depending on the amount of AI frames you add, that's where we would draw the line for a great experience. As Marcus has stated multiple times, that anything from around 55 milliseconds and up has you starting to feel a bit detached from the character, with the effect getting worse and worse the higher the latency. If you want to reduce latency and boost frame rates, you can lower your resolution, disable ray tracing, tweak other quality of visual settings, or switch DLSS from quality to balanced or performance mode. Now, the trickiest part of this review is addressing the pricing. The 5070 Ti is expected to launch at £729 in the UK or $749 in the US, which is fantastic for those who manage to grab one within moments of its release. However, based on early GPU listings and price trends, many will likely end up paying a lot more than that. The 5070 Ti is a versatile GPU, delivering excellent performance at the £729 price point. In our tests, it outperforms the Radeon RX 7900 XTX at both 4K and 1440p, and obviously dominates when ray tracing is enabled. Right now, their 7900 XTX is currently priced around £900 for one of the few cards still in stock, making the 5070 Ti look like an incredible option compared to AMD's previous generation. That said, the XTX does come with 24GB of VRAM, which could have a significant impact depending on your specific needs. If you can grab a 5070 Ti at or near its MSRP, It's a solid choice. However, as the price creeps closer to $800 or even $900, as we've seen some models listed for, it becomes much less appealing. That said, if the recent rumors are true, AMD might have already botched the launch of the 9070 XT by setting the price way too high once again. I guess we'll just have to wait and see and hope these rumors are just that and not truths. With the stock of older generation cards dwindling and prices rising as people scramble to buy anything after missing out on the new GPUs, it's becoming increasingly difficult to recommend anything at the moment. The 5070 Ti seems like a great GPU at its MSRP, but if the prices increase over time, like we've seen already with the 5080 and 5090, it becomes less appealing and much more frustrating. All we can do is hope and pray there will be enough cards available at the MSRP, or at the very least, much smaller and much more reasonable price premiums.
Well then folks, I don't know about you, but I actually found that to be pretty unexpected. On paper, it didn't really look like it was going to be a massive difference versus the previous generation, but the numbers don't lie, our testing doesn't lie, and just all round this has actually been a really impressive graphics card. You don't really need any more unless you're specifically going to be like focusing on 4K path tracing like our Alan Wake testing showed. It's not really up to that at 4K, but I mean for everything else, this thing excels, and there's no doubt about it that if I was in the market for a brand new graphics card, this would definitely be the one that I was looking at. Obviously the problem is that's almost certainly going to be the same with this card, and unless you actively need something super high-end and you need it now, and I mean need it now, then just wait, because there's no hurry on this. We don't know what's going to be happening in terms of like tariffs in the world. We don't know what's going to be happening with availability, just pricing from Nvidia, AMD competition, all of these things. Unless you specifically need it now, then you've got to question how much it's going to be worth paying for this. I mean, there's just such a massive difference between MSRP, especially if you can get something like the TUF or the Gaming Pro that we used in this video. Those are going to be the ones to go for because they have the best value for money. But Asus will almost certainly charge you a load of money for a Strix, and if that's inflated on top of the already inflated price, then just forget it. In my opinion, that's absolutely not going to be worth buying. But of course, these are just our opinions. Let us know your thoughts on the 5070 Ti down in the comment section below. Do you think that this is the card we've been waiting for? Is this the best of the generation? Or are you still disappointed? Do you still want loads more? Do you think multi-frame generation is fantastic? Or do you think it's a waste of money? But a massive thank you for watching. Smash the like button, get yourself subscribed. And as I say, if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this rig, including the new 5070 Ti, you can find it listed down below with our affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not check out the new Corsair Frame 4000D? Working as the perfect blend of size and compatibility, this affordable chassis comes with or without fans, has extra ventilation down the bottom, and larger mesh cutouts on the front for power-hungry components. It's also designed to be as easy to build in as possible, with modular components and the InfiniRail fan mount system that supports 120, 140, and even 200mm fans on the front. Get your build on today with Corsair, check out the link down below. But thank you guys so much for watching, we'll catch you in the next one.